A police officer accused an elderly black man of stealing a car and shot him in cold blood, completely unaware that the man's son was a millionaire. What unfolded afterward will leave you speechless. Welcome to Adam Alpha, where we uncover stories that shock and inspire. An old man, aged 80, arrived at a busy shopping center in his luxury car, a sleek vehicle that gleamed under the afternoon sun. It was the kind of car that turned heads, whether out of admiration, envy, or, at times, suspicion. This man, with his neatly combed silver hair and careful movements, exuded an air of quiet dignity. He maneuvered the car into a parking spot with the precision of someone who'd driven for decades and stepped out, his posture slightly stooped but steady. But what happened next in that parking lot will make your blood boil. Stay tuned to Adam Alpha to find out how this routine trip turned into a nightmare. His plan was simple, a quick trip to the grocery store to pick up a few items. The parking lot was bustling with activity, filled with the hum of engines, snippets of conversation, and the occasional sound of shopping carts rattling across the pavement. The man locked the car with the press of a button, pocketed the key, and walked unhurriedly toward the store's entrance. His routine was well practiced. He'd been coming to this shopping center for years, blending into the rhythm of the place without drawing attention. Inside the store, he moved efficiently, selecting the items he needed and making his way to the checkout line. Despite his age, he carried himself with quiet independence, declining offers of assistance from the cashier with a polite smile. He paid for his groceries, thanked the cashier, and carried his bag back to the parking lot. As he approached his car, a faint unease began to stir within him. Near his vehicle stood a police officer, a tall figure in a crisp uniform, who appeared to be watching him intently. The officer's expression was unreadable, his stance firm, as if he were waiting for something. The old man felt a flicker of discomfort. He couldn't think of any reason why the officer would be looking at him or his car with such scrutiny. Brushing off the feeling, the man adjusted the bag in his hand and continued toward his car. He told himself there was no reason to worry, he wasn't doing anything wrong, after all. Reaching the driver's side door, he placed the bag of groceries on the passenger seat, sat down, and started the ignition. The officer moved immediately, stepping forward with a sense of purpose. The old man noticed the sudden movement from the corner of his eye but barely had time to register it before the officer stood beside the car, rapping firmly on the driver's side window. The man rolled the window down, his expression polite but puzzled. Without any preamble, the officer accused him of stealing the vehicle. The words hit the old man like a bolt of lightning, leaving him momentarily speechless. His mind raced to make sense of the situation. Why would someone think he had stolen the car? There had to be some mistake. With a calm yet bewildered tone, the man explained that the car was his, it wasn't stolen. He assured the officer it had been a gift from his son, who was a successful businessman. But the officer didn't seem convinced. Instead, his demeanor grew sharper, his tone firmer. He demanded proof of ownership, his eyes narrowing as if searching for any sign of dishonesty. The old man reached into his pocket, hoping to find something that could help, but all he had were his keys and his wallet. He admitted he didn't have the car's registration documents with him. After all, he had only come to buy groceries. Why would he bring those papers along? But he quickly added that he could call his son, who could send a copy of the documents digitally. The officer's expression darkened further. He dismissed the offer with a sharp gesture, implying that digital documents were too easy to forge. The old man felt his pulse quicken, a mix of frustration and incredulity rising within him. How could this officer leap to such conclusions? What reason did he have to distrust him so completely? As the officer's suspicion grew more evident, the situation began to escalate. His voice took on a commanding tone, and he declared that the old man was under arrest for stealing the car. The words struck the man like a physical blow. Arrested? For what? He hadn't done anything wrong. The shock and disbelief were written all over his face as he tried to process what was happening. He couldn't understand how things had spiraled so quickly. One moment, he had been going about his day, and the next, he was being accused of a crime he hadn't committed. The old man tried to reason with the officer, his voice steady but tinged with desperation. He insisted that there must be some mistake, that the car truly belonged to him. But the officer's demeanor remained unyielding, his mind seemingly made up. For a moment, the old man sat frozen in his seat, unsure of how to proceed. He had always believed in the system, in the idea that justice would prevail and misunderstandings could be resolved with calm explanations. But now, faced with the officer's unrelenting suspicion, he began to feel the weight of his age and vulnerability pressing down on him. The officer, meanwhile, stood firm, his hand resting on his belt as if prepared for any resistance. He repeated his demand, telling the old man to step out of the car. The man hesitated, the grocery bag still resting on the passenger seat beside him. His mind raced through the possibilities, but none of them made sense. Why would anyone accuse an 80-year-old man of stealing a car? Trying to stay composed, the old man once again mentioned his son, explaining that he could provide proof of ownership. But the officer cut him off, reiterating his belief that digital documents were unreliable. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and inescapable, as the tension between the two men continued to build. The old man felt a flicker of indignation rising within him. He had lived a long life, working hard and raising a family, and now he was being treated like a criminal. The sense of injustice was almost overwhelming, but he knew he needed to stay calm. He didn't want to make the situation worse, even as his frustration grew. The officer, however, seemed unmoved by the old man's attempts to explain himself. His stance remained rigid, his expression unyielding. To him, it appeared that the situation was black and white: either the man could produce proof of ownership, or he couldn't. And if he couldn't, the officer was prepared to act accordingly. The old man took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He couldn't believe this was happening. All he had wanted was to buy some groceries, to go about his day without incident. But now, he found himself at the center of a confrontation he couldn't have anticipated. As he looked into the officer's eyes, he saw no hint of understanding or compassion, only a determination to carry out what he believed to be his duty. The old man sat in his car, his grip tightening on the steering wheel as he looked at the officer standing outside his door. The officer's eyes held an unrelenting suspicion, his body language radiating authority. It was clear that no explanation would satisfy him, and the man could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. He tried once again to diffuse the tension, his voice steady despite the rising frustration. He repeated his assertion that the car was not stolen, explaining in detail that his son had gifted it to him. But the officer's expression didn't change. He didn't seem interested in hearing anything that contradicted his assumptions. To the old man, it felt as if the officer had already decided he was guilty, and nothing he said could make a difference. His frustration grew, mingling with disbelief and a growing sense of injustice. The old man's voice became firmer, though he remained calm. He tried to reason with the officer, pointing out that there must be a way to resolve the misunderstanding without escalating it further. But the officer's patience appeared to be wearing thin. His stance became more rigid, his tone sharper, as he repeated his command for the old man to step out of the car. The man hesitated, reluctant to leave the vehicle. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, and the idea of being arrested felt absurd and humiliating. His refusal to comply wasn't out of defiance but a desperate attempt to make the officer see reason. He couldn't understand why the situation had escalated so quickly, why the officer seemed so determined to treat him as a criminal. The officer, however, interpreted the hesitation differently. To him, it was a sign of resistance, perhaps even defiance. His voice rose in intensity as he demanded compliance, his words carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. The old man, feeling cornered, protested once more, his frustration finally breaking through. He spoke with a mix of disbelief and indignation, unable to fathom how he could be treated this way over something so baseless. The officer's eyes narrowed as the tension between them reached its breaking point. He took a step closer to the car, his hand instinctively resting on his holster. To him, the old man's refusal to comply was more than just frustrating, it was potentially dangerous. The officer's training, his instincts, and his assumptions all combined into a single moment of heightened alertness. As the old man raised his hand slightly in a gesture meant to emphasize his harmlessness, the officer's perception twisted the movement into something else. To him, it looked like the man was reaching for something, perhaps a weapon. It was a split-second judgment, a decision made under the pressure of tension and adrenaline. The officer drew his gun in one fluid motion. Before the old man could react, the sound of the gunshot shattered the stillness of the parking lot. The bullet struck the man in the leg, and he let out a sharp cry of pain. The man collapsed forward, his body racked with agony as he clutched at his wounded leg. His voice, trembling with both shock and pain, called out for help. The groceries he had carefully placed in the car fell to the floor, some spilling out of their bag in the chaos. His world, so orderly and routine just moments ago, had suddenly descended into chaos. Around them, bystanders began to gather, drawn by the noise and the unfolding scene. Their faces showed a mix of shock, concern, and helplessness. Some pulled out their phones to record the incident, while others whispered among themselves, unsure of what to do. The officer, however, seemed unmoved by the growing crowd. His focus remained entirely on the old man, ignoring the man's cries of pain. The officer moved quickly, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. He ordered the man to remain still, though the man was in no condition to move, even if he wanted to. Blood seeped through the fabric of the old man's pants, staining the ground beneath him. Despite this, the officer roughly secured the handcuffs around his wrists, treating him as if he were a dangerous criminal rather than an injured senior. The old man winced at the harshness of the treatment, his voice hoarse as he tried to protest, but his words were drowned out by the pain and the overwhelming sense of helplessness. He had never felt so vulnerable, so powerless, as he did in that moment. The officer, seemingly unfazed, grabbed the old man by the arm and began dragging him toward the patrol car. The crowd murmured louder now, some voices rising in protest at the treatment of the injured man, but no one stepped forward to intervene. The officer's authority, his uniform, and his gun were enough to keep everyone at bay. Once at the patrol car, the officer opened the door and unceremoniously pushed the old man inside. The man groaned in pain as his injured leg was jostled, the movement sending fresh waves of agony through his body. He slumped against the seat, his breathing labored, as the door slammed shut behind him. The drive to the station was a blur of pain and confusion for the old man. Every bump in the road seemed to amplify the throbbing in his leg, and he could feel the warmth of his own blood soaking through his clothing. His thoughts raced, a chaotic mix of anger, fear, and disbelief. He couldn't understand how this had happened, how a simple trip to the grocery store had ended with him in the back of a police car, wounded and humiliated. At the station, the officer pulled the old man out of the car, showing little care for his injury. The man stumbled, nearly falling, as he was led inside. His legs screamed in protest with every step, and his face was pale from the loss of blood. Yet the officer didn't seem to notice or care. He escorted the man to a cell, opened the door, and pushed him inside. The metal door closed with a resounding clang, leaving the old man alone in the cold, sterile space. He lowered himself onto the bench, his movements slow and pained. Blood pooled around his injured leg, a stark reminder of what had just happened. He rested his head against the wall, his breath shallow, as he tried to gather his thoughts. Eventually, a different officer appeared and informed him that he was allowed to make a phone call. The old man nodded weakly, his hands trembling as he reached for the phone. His fingers felt clumsy, and it took him a moment to dial the number. When the call connected, he heard his son's voice on the other end. For a moment, the old man couldn't speak. His throat tightened, and tears pricked at the corners of his eyes. Finally, he managed to explain what had happened, his voice shaking with emotion. He described the confrontation, the gunshot, and the arrest, his words interspersed with gasps of pain as the reality of his situation sank in. On the other end of the line, the son listened in stunned silence. But as his father's words sank in, his shock gave way to anger. The idea that his elderly father had been shot and treated like a criminal for no reason filled him with a burning rage. He promised his father that he would come to the station immediately and that he wouldn't let this injustice go unanswered. The old man hung up the phone, his hand shaking as he placed it back on the receiver. He leaned back against the wall, his body and spirit both exhausted. His only hope now lay in his son's ability to intervene, to bring clarity and justice to a situation that had spiraled so far out of control. The son stormed toward the front desk, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of someone in charge. The officers nearby exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the brewing storm. Without hesitation, the son demanded answers, his tone leaving no room for dismissal. He wanted to know why his father, an elderly man with no criminal record, had been shot, arrested, and locked in a cell. As the son's anger spilled into the air, the atmosphere in the station grew tense. Officers paused in their tasks, their eyes flicking toward the commotion. Some seemed hesitant to approach, while others whispered among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with the scene. The son's wealth and status were not unknown to the department, and his voice carried the weight of someone used to being heard. It didn't take long for the chief of police to be alerted. The commotion reached his office, and he quickly made his way toward the source. The chief was a tall man with an air of authority, his uniform crisp and his expression controlled. As he stepped into the main room and saw the son pacing near the front desk, his expression shifted slightly, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. He was well acquainted with the man, their paths having crossed in social and professional circles. The chief approached, his voice calm but firm, asking what had happened. The son immediately turned to face him, his frustration evident in every word as he explained the situation. He recounted how his father had been stopped by an officer, accused without cause, and then shot in the leg before being dragged to the station. His voice rose as he emphasized the injustice of the entire ordeal, pointing out his father's age and frailty. The chief's expression darkened as the details unfolded. He was no stranger to dealing with complaints against officers, but this was different. The man standing before him wasn't just any member of the public, he was someone with influence, someone whose words carried weight beyond the walls of the station. And the accusations being made were serious enough to demand immediate attention. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the chief assured the son that he would personally look into the matter. He gestured for the son to follow him into his office, away from the growing crowd of onlookers. The door closed behind them, muffling the sounds of the busy station. Inside the office, the chief wasted no time. He asked for all available details and directed his staff to gather any evidence related to the arrest. As they waited, the son's frustration simmered just beneath the surface. His words came quickly, filled with the urgency of someone who felt every second wasted was another second his father suffered unjustly. The chief listened carefully, his own sense of unease growing with each passing moment. He couldn't ignore the seriousness of the accusations, nor the potential fallout if they were true. When the evidence was brought in, the chief began his review. Among the files was CCTV footage from the shopping center parking lot, captured by cameras positioned near the area where the incident had occurred. The son watched intently as the chief queued up the footage on his computer screen. The video played out with a clarity that left no room for doubt. On the screen, the old man could be seen walking toward his car, his movements slow but steady. He placed a bag of groceries in the passenger seat, entered the vehicle, and started the engine. Moments later, the officer approached, his posture tense, and the interaction began. The son's jaw tightened as he watched the scene unfold. The footage showed his father, clearly confused and trying to explain himself, his body language calm and non-threatening. There was no sign of aggression, no behavior that could justify the officer's response. And then, the moment of escalation came, the officer drawing his weapon and firing, the old man collapsing to the ground. The chief leaned back in his chair, his face set in a grim expression. He replayed the footage, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed every detail. The evidence was irrefutable, the old man had done nothing to provoke such a response, and the officer's actions were not only unwarranted but deeply troubling. The son remained silent for a moment, his anger replaced by a cold determination. He didn't need to say anything, the footage spoke for itself. The chief glanced at him, nodding slightly as if to acknowledge that the evidence confirmed everything he had claimed. The chief immediately made his decision. He issued an order for the old man's release and instructed his staff to escort him from the cell. At the same time, he initiated an internal investigation into the officer's conduct, instructing his team to gather all relevant reports and witness statements. He made it clear that the matter would be handled swiftly and thoroughly. As the son left the office to check on his father, the chief remained seated, his mind racing. He knew the fallout from this incident could be significant, not just for the officer involved but for the department as a whole. The evidence was damning, and the situation had already drawn enough attention to ensure it wouldn't be easily forgotten. When the son finally saw his father, his anger flared again at the sight of the elderly man limping, his leg bandaged but still clearly causing him pain. But there was also relief that his father was finally out of the cell, finally free from the unjust treatment he had endured. The two embraced briefly before the son turned his attention back to the officers. His tone sharp, he demanded to know what steps would be taken next. The chief, stepping out of his office, assured the son that the investigation was already underway. He promised that the officer responsible would be held accountable for his actions and that the department would take every necessary step to ensure justice was served. The son nodded, his expression still hard but tinged with a grudging acknowledgement. He wasn't fully satisfied, nothing could erase what his father had gone through, but for now, he would let the process play out. He resolved to follow the investigation closely, making it clear that he wouldn't rest until the matter was resolved. As the chief returned to his office to begin the investigation, the son helped his father out of the station. The tension in the room lingered long after they left, a reminder to everyone present of the gravity of the situation and the consequences that would surely follow. The investigation into the incident unfolded over the course of several days, each moment laden with tension for those involved. The police department, under significant scrutiny, moved quickly to gather evidence, interview witnesses, and compile reports. The chief of police ensured that the process was thorough, knowing the gravity of the situation and the implications it carried for his department. From the start, the evidence painted a damning picture of the officer's actions. The CCTV footage from the shopping center was reviewed repeatedly, its clarity and conclusiveness leaving no room for doubt. The video showed the old man moving calmly and deliberately as he placed his groceries in the car and prepared to leave. His demeanor was entirely unthreatening, and his confusion when approached by the officer was evident. The footage captured the escalation in excruciating detail, the officer's aggressive stance, his refusal to listen to the old man's explanations, and the moment he drew his weapon were all laid bare. Each frame of the video reinforced the old man's account of events, aligning perfectly with the statements he had given to the investigators. Witnesses who had been in the parking lot that day were also interviewed. Several bystanders corroborated the old man's story, describing how they had seen him go about his business without incident before being confronted by the officer. Their accounts further confirmed that the shooting had been entirely unprovoked, an act of excessive force that could not be justified. The investigation uncovered more troubling details about the officer's behavior. Records revealed a history of complaints against him, ranging from rudeness to overstepping his authority. While none of the previous incidents had escalated to the level of violence, they painted a picture of an officer who often acted impulsively and without proper restraint. As the findings of the investigation were compiled into a formal report, it became clear that the officer had acted without justification. The car was legally owned by the old man's son, as verified by registration documents and ownership records. There had been no crime, no stolen vehicle, and no reason for the officer to act as he did. The case was brought before the court, where the evidence was presented in meticulous detail. The old man's injuries, the video footage, the witness statements, and the officer's disciplinary history all formed a compelling narrative of misconduct. The courtroom was filled with a charged atmosphere, the weight of the case drawing attention from both the public and the media. The officer sat stiffly in the defendant's chair, his expression unreadable as the evidence was laid out. He offered a defense, claiming that he had acted out of concern for public safety and had genuinely believed the old man posed a threat. But his arguments failed to sway the court. The overwhelming evidence of his excessive force and the lack of any credible threat made his actions indefensible. In the end, the court found the officer guilty of misconduct and excessive use of force. The verdict was clear and decisive. The judge's voice carried through the courtroom as he pronounced the sentence. The officer was fired from his position, stripped of his law enforcement credentials, and permanently banned from joining any armed forces or law enforcement agency in the future. The ruling sent shockwaves through the community. For some, it was a moment of vindication, proof that justice could prevail, even in cases involving authority figures. For others, it was a sobering reminder of the damage that could be done when those entrusted with power abused it. The officer's name became synonymous with disgrace, his career in ruins and his reputation irreparably tarnished. Despite the court's decision and the officer's punishment, the old man's family found little solace. The scars left by the incident ran deep, affecting them in ways that no legal ruling could undo. The old man, though relieved that justice had been served, struggled to move past the trauma of being shot and treated like a criminal. His leg, while healing, served as a constant reminder of the day his dignity and safety were stripped away. For his son, the aftermath was equally difficult. While he was grateful that the truth had come to light and his father's name had been cleared, he couldn't shake the anger and guilt that consumed him. He replayed the events in his mind, imagining all the ways things could have been worse. The thought of losing his father to such a senseless act haunted him, leaving him restless and consumed by a need to protect his family at all costs. Their family gatherings, once filled with laughter and warmth, were now tinged with a quiet tension. The old man's cheerful demeanor had been replaced by a cautious reserve, his trust in others diminished. The son, too, carried the weight of the experience, his interactions with the world colored by a newfound weariness. In the broader community, the incident sparked conversations about accountability and the abuse of authority. Activists and community leaders pointed to the case as an example of why systemic changes were needed within law enforcement. Protests and rallies were held, with people calling for reforms to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. The officer, now stripped of his badge, faced the full force of public disgrace. His name was plastered across news headlines, his actions condemned by commentators and citizens alike. He became a symbol of the very problems he had come to represent, his fall from power serving as a cautionary tale. In the quiet moments that followed the chaos, the old man and his son found themselves reflecting on the ordeal. They spoke less about the incident itself and more about its impact on their lives, the lessons it had taught them, and the resilience they needed to move forward. For the old man, the journey toward healing was slow but steady. He took solace in the support of his family, finding strength in their presence, even as he grappled with his own sense of vulnerability. For the son, the experience deepened his resolve to stand up against injustice, to use his influence to bring about change where it was needed most. The story closed with a quiet reflection on the damage caused by the abuse of authority. While justice had been served in the courtroom, the emotional wounds left behind were harder to heal. The officer's actions had left a permanent mark, not just on the old man and his son, but on everyone who had witnessed the events or followed the case. In the end, the old man and his son resolved to move forward, carrying with them the lessons of the past in the hope that their ordeal might serve as a catalyst for change. While the pain of what had happened would never fully fade, they found strength in each other and in the belief that their story could help prevent others from enduring the same suffering. This is Adam Alpha, bringing you stories that matter. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more hard-hitting narratives. Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction, created to highlight the real and ongoing issues of racial profiling and systemic discrimination. It aims to raise awareness and spark conversations about the importance of justice and equality.